The ships came out of nowhere. One moment the sky was empty, and the next moment it was full of dark metal and strange light. Hundreds of vessels hanging over the earth like a swarm of iron insects, waiting to descend upon something small and helpless. Every government on the planet scrambled to respond. Every satellite turned upward. Every radio frequency filled with chatter and confusion and fear. But the ships did nothing at first. They simply waited, as if the act of waiting itself was a message. And it was. 3 days after their arrival, the aliens made contact. Not through radio or signal or code, but by landing a single shuttle on the lawn of the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, burning the grass black in a perfect circle and sending diplomats and security teams stumbling backward in shock. The door of the shuttle opened with a hiss, like a giant serpent exhaling, and out stepped Ambassador Vrethka of the Vralketh Dominion. He was tall, nearly 8 feet, his body a strange and unsettling blend of insect and reptile. Hard chitinous plates covering his chest and limbs, while a long segmented tail dragged behind him. His eyes were compound like a fly's, but enormous and the color of dried blood. And when he spoke, his voice came through a translation device strapped to his throat that turned his clicking mandible sounds into cold, flat English. "We are the Vralketh Dominion," he said to the assembly of world leaders who had gathered in emergency session. "We have claimed over 400 worlds across this arm of the galaxy, and today we are here to inform you that Earth has been selected for incorporation into our territory." The room erupted, but Vrethka did not flinch. He stood perfectly still with his clawed hands folded behind his back, and waited for the noise to die down, the way a teacher might wait for children to stop shouting. "You are being given a courtesy," he continued. 30 of your solar days to surrender governance of this planet. Your species will not be destroyed. You will simply serve. This is not cruelty. This is order. The Secretary-General stood and told Vrethka in very clear terms that Earth would not surrender, that humanity would fight with everything it had, that no species had the right to claim dominion over another. Vrethka tilted his head, and his mandibles clicked in what the translators later identified as the Vralketh equivalent of a smile. "We hoped you would say that," he said. He lifted one clawed hand, and a holographic projection filled the chamber, showing a creature unlike anything on Earth, 6 legs, each ending in curved talons the length of swords, a body covered in black and red chitin plates thick as tank armor, a head with no visible eyes, but a crown of sensory spines that glowed faintly orange, and a mouth that opened in 4 directions, revealing rows of teeth, designed not just to kill, but to tear and hold, and never let go. "This is the Skorax," Vrethka said. "It is the apex predator of our dominion, bred and perfected over 10,000 years for a single purpose, to break the will of any species that resists us. It has been deployed on over 200 worlds, and on every single one it has succeeded. Your military will not stop it. Your weapons will not kill it. Your people will see it, and they will understand that resistance is not courage, but stupidity." The room was silent. Vrethka let the image rotate slowly, showing the creature from every angle, showing footage of it on other worlds tearing through alien soldiers like paper, scattering entire armies with a single subsonic roar that seemed to reach into the brain and pull out every instinct to flee. "We will deploy one," he said. "A single Skorax, outside one of your cities as a demonstration, and after you have seen what it does, you will have the remainder of your 30 days to reconsider." Back to his shuttle, without waiting for a response, because in his experience, no response was needed. Every species reacted the same way, first with defiance, then with horror, then with surrender. It was as predictable as gravity. Within hours, the world was in chaos. News networks ran the footage on loop. Governments held emergency sessions. Militaries mobilized. People panicked and prayed and argued about what to do. In a secure facility beneath the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, a woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in a dark room watching the Vralketh footage for the 14th time. She was a xenobiologist, one of the few on Earth, since there had never been alien life to study until now. She was 42 years old, with dark hair pulled back tight, and circles under her eyes that spoke of too much coffee and not enough sleep. She had been pulled from her university post and assigned to the hastily assembled Earth Defense Council as a scientific advisor. And she was fairly certain no one expected her to actually be useful. But she could not stop watching the Skorax. Not the creature itself, though it was terrifying enough, but the things it hunted, the alien species on those conquered worlds. She watched their reactions over and over, slowing the footage down frame by frame, studying their body language and their movements and their faces. Every single one of them ran. Every species on every world, the moment the Skorax appeared and began its threat display, they ran. Soldiers dropped weapons and ran. Civilians stampeded and ran. Even armed vehicles turned and retreated. It did not matter how large the species was or how advanced their technology. The Skorax roared, and they fled. Dr. Vasquez paused the footage and leaned back in her chair. She thought about the Skorax's biology as she understood it so far. The subsonic roar that triggered panic responses, the venom that induced terror, designed to overwhelm. Everything about the creature was built around a single evolutionary strategy. It was a dominance predator. It did not chase, and it did not ambush. It announced itself and waited for its prey to break. And on 200 worlds, that strategy had worked perfectly. Because on 200 worlds, every living thing was hardwired to flee from something bigger and louder and more dangerous than itself. Elena pulled up a different video on her personal tablet. Not alien footage, but something from Earth. A video she had seen years ago that had made her laugh at the time. It showed a house cat, an ordinary orange tabby, standing in a backyard face to face with a black bear that outweighed it by at least 500 pounds. The cat did not run. The cat arched its back and puffed up its fur and hissed, and the bear, the massive powerful bear, hesitated and then backed away. Elena stared at the screen for a long time. Phone and called the Defense Council. "I need to present something," she said. "I think I know what the Skorax has never faced before." On the other end of the line, someone asked her what she meant. She looked at the frozen image of the little orange cat, standing its ground against something that could have killed it with a single swipe. And she said something that would change the course of human history. Something that does not run. They dropped the Skorax 30 kilometers outside of Lyon on a cold gray morning when the fog still clung to the hills like something alive. The Vralketh shuttle descended in silence and opened its cargo bay, and the creature stepped out onto Earth's soil for the first time, and the ground seemed to shudder beneath it. 900 kilograms of armored muscle and engineered rage standing in a French meadow, with wildflowers crushed flat under its 6 taloned feet. It lifted its head, and its crown of sensory spines flared bright orange as it tasted the air and the electromagnetic fields and the heartbeat of every living thing within a 2-kilometer radius. Then it roared. The sound was not loud in the way thunder is loud. It was loud in the way that dread is loud. It bypassed the ears and went straight into the chest and the gut and the oldest, most primitive part of the brain that still remembers what it was like to be hunted in the dark. Perimeter of the quarantine zone felt their hands shake and their stomachs drop, and some of them took a step backward without meaning to. The French military had set up a defensive ring with armored vehicles and infantry positions and drone coverage, and they were ready, they thought, for whatever came. They were not ready. The Skorax moved through the quarantine zone like a nightmare given legs. It did not charge blindly the way a wild animal might. It advanced with purpose, testing the defenses the way a chess player tests an opponent, probing one flank, then the other, then striking where the line was thinnest. The first platoon opened fire, and the bullets hit the creature's chitin plating, and sparked, and ricocheted, and did nothing at all. A grenade launcher scored a direct hit on its side, and the Skorax stumbled half a step, and then kept coming. An anti-tank missile struck its shoulder, and cracked one plate, and the creature screamed a sound that made 3 soldiers vomit, and 2 more simply sit down on the ground and stop moving. It was inside the first defensive line in under 4 minutes. What it did there was not just killing, it was theater. The Skorax did not simply tear apart the soldiers it caught, it arranged them. It placed bodies in patterns on the ground in deliberate geometric shapes that meant something in whatever alien psychology it had been bred to exploit. It was marking territory. It was sending a message, not to the dead, but to the living who would find them. Up in orbit, Ambassador Vrethka watched the live feed with his compound eyes half-lidded in satisfaction. This was exactly how it always went. First the weapons, then the failure, then the fear spreading outward like ripples in water. Back on the ground, a man named Sergeant Mark Duval was trying very hard not to die. He was 40 years old, and he had served in the French Foreign Legion for 18 of those years. He had fought in Mali and Syria and a dozen other places where the world had decided to tear itself apart, and he had survived all of it through a combination of skill and stubbornness, and a refusal to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. But he had never seen anything like the Skorax. His squad had been positioned on the eastern flank when the creature punched through the line, and he had watched it kill 6 men in the time it took him to reload his rifle. He had emptied 2 full magazines into its face at close range and accomplished nothing except making it look at him. It had looked at him with that eyeless head, those glowing spines turning toward him like flowers tracking the sun, and he had felt the fear hit him like a wave of ice water filling his lungs. He did not run, not because he was braver than the men who did, but because his legs simply refused to move. And by the time they started working again, the Skorax had moved on to the next position, and Duval was still alive for reasons he did not understand. He pulled his surviving squad members back to a secondary position, and called in a report that was mostly swearing and partly useful tactical information. The battle lasted 2 hours, and it was not really a battle at all. It was a demonstration, just as the Vrolketh had promised. The Skorax destroyed 3 armored vehicles, killed 47 soldiers, and established a territory roughly 6 kilometers wide, before it settled into a patrol pattern, circling its domain with the mechanical patience of something that knew it had already won. The footage went global within minutes. People watched on their phones and their televisions and their computers, as the most advanced military equipment on Earth failed to stop a single alien creature. The Vrolketh broadcast the footage themselves on every frequency they could reach, along with a simple repeating message in every human language. 27 days remained. Began to talk about surrender. Not openly, not yet, but in private rooms and secure calls, the conversation shifted from how do we fight this to how do we negotiate the best terms. And that shift was exactly what the Skorax was designed to create. In her basement laboratory, Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the footage too. But she was not watching the Skorax. She was watching the soldiers. She was watching how they reacted to the creature's subsonic roar and its territorial displays, and she was comparing their reactions to the alien species in the Vrolketh footage. The pattern was the same. The roar triggered a panic response. The displays overwhelmed the rational mind. The venom in the spines that grazed soldiers induced a chemical terror that lasted for hours. Everything about the Skorax was designed to activate the flight response, to make every nerve in the body scream one single word: run. And it worked. On 200 alien worlds it had worked. Earth. It was working too, because humans, for all their courage and technology, were still animals with animal brains that could be hacked by the right combination of sound and chemistry and primal fear. But Elena kept coming back to her theory. The Skorax was a dominance predator. It won not by being the strongest thing on the field, but by making everything else believe it was. Its entire strategy depended on its prey responding to threat with flight. That was the key. That was the lock the Vrolketh had used to open every world they had ever conquered. And Elena believed she had found a key that did not fit that lock. She stood before the Defense Council that evening, in a room full of generals and politicians who looked like they had aged 10 years in a single day, and she laid out her theory in plain terms. The Skorax is not invincible, she said. It is a bully, the most sophisticated bully the galaxy has ever produced, but still a bully. Depends entirely on its target being afraid. Every species it has faced evolved on worlds with clear predator hierarchies, where the correct response to a larger threat is to flee. But Earth is not like those worlds. She pulled up images on the screen behind her. A honey badger fighting off a lion, a mother moose charging a grizzly bear, a goose chasing a grown man across a parking lot, a house cat staring down a bear. Earth produced something the Vrolketh have never encountered, she said. Creatures that respond to a dominance display not with fear, but with aggression. Creatures that are too small and too angry and too fundamentally stubborn to run from anything, regardless of how big it is. The room was quiet. A French general leaned forward and asked her what exactly she was proposing. Elena took a breath and said the words that she knew sounded insane, but that she believed with every fiber of her scientific mind. I need a cat, she said. Meanest one you can find. Sergeant Duval, who had been called in to brief the council on the ground situation, stared at her from across the table, and for the first time since the Skorax had nearly killed him, he felt something that was not fear. It was curiosity, and underneath the curiosity, something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. The cat came from a shelter in Lyon. His name was Colonel Whiskers, and he was the worst cat in the entire facility. Possibly the worst cat in all of France. A massive orange tabby, with one ear torn half off and one eye missing, and a body covered in scars from a life spent fighting everything that moved. The shelter workers warned them when they came to collect him. He has bitten 3 veterinarians, the woman at the front desk said, reading from his file. 2 mail carriers, 1 priest, and a child who was only trying to pet him. He has escaped his cage 11 times. He has terrorized every other animal in this building. And last week, he attacked a German shepherd through the bars of his enclosure, and the German shepherd required stitches. She looked up at Dr. Vasquez and Sergeant Duval, who stood in the lobby in their military-issue jackets, looking like people who had made a series of questionable life decisions. Are you sure you want this cat? He sounds perfect, Elena said. They put Colonel Whiskers in a reinforced carrier, and he immediately began screaming. Not meowing, but screaming. A sound like a small demon being squeezed through a very tight pipe. He clawed at the carrier walls with a fury that suggested he took the entire concept of containment as a personal insult. Duval carried the carrier to the vehicle, and the cat bit him through the air holes. I like him, Duval said with blood running down his finger. They drove to the forward observation post that had been set up 3 kilometers from the edge of the Skorax's territory. A hastily assembled collection of tents and equipment and very nervous soldiers who all stared at the cat carrier as if it contained a bomb. The plan was simple, because there was no way to make it complicated. They would release Colonel Whiskers into the outer edge of the Skorax's territory, the area the creature had marked with its kills, and they would observe what happened through drone cameras and long-range optics. If Elena was right, the cat would not run, and the Skorax would not know what to do with something that did not run. If Elena was wrong, they would lose one very angry cat and be back to square one. This is insane, Duval said, as they prepared the release point. Yes, Elena agreed. You are asking me to believe that a 4-kilogram house cat is going to do what tanks and missiles could not. I am asking you to believe that 4 kilograms of pure spite might be more effective against the dominance predator than 400 tons of steel. Duval looked at the carrier, where Colonel Whiskers was glaring at him with his single eye like a furry orange war crime waiting to happen. "Fair enough," he said. They opened the carrier at the edge of the territory, and Colonel Whiskers stepped out onto the grass with the cautious dignity of a king surveying a new conquest. He sniffed air, and his remaining ear rotated like a radar dish, and his single golden eye swept the landscape. He could smell the Skorax, the alien chemical markers it had left on the ground, and the trees, and the bodies it had arranged in its territory. Any normal animal would have detected those markers and fled, because that was what territorial markers were designed to do. They were warnings. They were promises of violence. Colonel Whiskers smelled the markers, and his fur began to rise along his spine, not in fear, in anger. He walked forward into the territory, with his tail puffed to 3 times its normal size, and every hair on his body standing straight up, and he looked like a small orange explosion, moving with tremendous purpose towards something he fully intended to fight. Elena watched through the drone feed and held her breath. The Skorax detected the cat within minutes. Its sensory spines flared, and it turned toward this new intrusion into its domain. And it began to approach. Elena had seen the footage of the Skorax approaching human soldiers and alien armies, and the result was always the same. The creature would begin its threat display, and everything in front of it would break and scatter like glass. The Skorax came around a line of trees and saw Colonel Whiskers sitting in the middle of a clearing. It began its display. The spines on its head flared to full extension, glowing bright orange. Its venom sacs pulsed with bioluminescent warning colors. Its 6 legs spread wide to make its already massive body look even larger, and it opened its 4-part mouth and unleashed the subsonic roar that had broken the will of 200 species across the galaxy. The sound hit Colonel Whiskers like a wall of invisible force. The cat flattened his remaining ear back against his skull. He arched his back until he looked like a furry orange bridge. He puffed up every single hair on his body until he finished it. Appeared twice his actual size, and he hissed. It was not an impressive sound by any objective measure. It was the hiss of a 5-kilogram cat that was angry about the existence of something in his general vicinity. But it was a sound the Skorax had never heard before, because no creature on any of the 200 worlds it had conquered had ever responded to its dominance display with a counter-display. The Skorax froze. Elena gripped the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles turned white. The Skorax tried again. It stepped closer and roared louder and flared its spines brighter, and it was pulling out every tool in its 10,000-year-old genetic arsenal to make this small orange thing understand that it should be afraid. Colonel Whiskers walked toward it. The observation post went silent. Every soldier, every scientist, every analyst staring at their screens as a one-eyed shelter cat marched directly toward a 900-kilogram alien killing machine with the confidence of something that had never once in its life considered the possibility that it could lose a fight. The Skorax lowered its head to examine this impossible creature, and Colonel Whiskers reached up with one scarred paw and swatted it directly on the nose. The sound that came out of every person in the observation post was not quite a gasp and not quite a laugh, but something in between. Duval choked on his coffee, and Elena made a noise she would later refuse to describe. The Skorax jerked its head back. It retreated 2 steps. It stood there for a long moment, its spines flickering in what Elena would later identify as confusion. Pure unadulterated confusion. The behavioral equivalent of a computer encountering an error it had no programming to handle. It tried once more, approaching with its mouth open and its venom sacs pulsing. Colonel Whiskers swatted it again, this time with claws out, and yowled a sound of such concentrated hostility that it could have curdled milk at 50 paces. The Skorax retreated again, and then Colonel Whiskers did something that would become the most watched moment in human history. He turned away from the 900-kilogram apex predator that had defeated armies and conquered worlds, and he sat down in the middle of its kill zone, and he began to groom himself. He licked his paw and rubbed it over his ear with the calm, methodical disinterest of a creature that had already decided the Skorax was not worth his attention. The observation post erupted. Soldiers were shouting and laughing, and some of them were crying, and Duval was standing with coffee dripping down his shirt, staring at the screen with his mouth open. Up in orbit on the Vrolketh command ship, Ambassador Vrethka watched the same feed in absolute silence. His subordinate turned to him with compound eyes wide, with something that looked very much like, "Ambassador," the subordinate said, "the Skorax is not engaging. It appears to be in a behavioral loop. It doesn't know what to do." Vrethka said nothing. He watched the small orange creature sitting in the middle of his perfect weapons territory, cleaning itself with total indifference. And for the first time in his long career of conquest, he felt something cold settle in his chest. On the screen, Colonel Whiskers finished grooming, yawned widely, showing every one of his small sharp teeth, and lay down in the grass for a nap. The Skorax circled him at a distance, like a moon orbiting a very small, very angry planet. Elena picked up her communicator and called the Defense Council. "It works," she said, and her voice was shaking, not with fear, but with the kind of wild joy that comes from being right about something impossible. The Skorax cannot process a prey animal that refuses to be prey. Its entire psychology is collapsing. Years of breeding, and it has no answer for a creature that simply does not care. The council asked her what she recommended. She smiled and said 2 words that would change everything. More cats. The internet did what the internet does best, and it did it at the speed of light. Within 6 hours of Colonel Whiskers swatting the Skorax on the nose, the footage had been viewed 4 billion times. Within 12 hours, it had been turned into approximately 10 million memes. Within 24 hours, the phrase "Be the Cat" had been spray-painted on walls in every major city on Earth. And people who had been terrified the day before were laughing, and that laughter was more dangerous to the Vrolketh than any weapon humanity had ever built. Because laughter is the opposite of fear, and fear was the only tool the Vrolketh had ever needed. The Cat Protocol, as the media immediately named it, went into effect within 48 hours. Shelters across the world were contacted, and suddenly every cat that had ever been labeled unadoptable, or aggressive, or difficult, found itself recruited into the strangest military operation in human history. Sergeant Biscuits was deployed outside Berlin. A feral calico called Princess Murderface was released near the quarantine zone in Lyon, and her live stream drew 2 billion viewers in the first hour. An enormous black cat named simply The Void was contributed by a woman in Texas who said she was happy to help save the world, but also quietly relieved to have the Void out of her house. Every single one of them did the same thing Colonel Whiskers had done. They did not run. They hissed and swatted and yowled and postured, and several of them simply ignored the Skorax entirely, which turned out to be even more psychologically devastating than direct aggression, because the creature had no framework for being considered irrelevant. But Dr. Elena Vasquez knew that cats were only the beginning. The cats had proven the theory, but the theory itself was much bigger than any one species. And as the world celebrated its unlikely feline heroes, Elena was buried in data, building a case that would reshape humanity's understanding of its own planet. She presented her findings to the United Nations General Assembly on a Tuesday morning, standing at the same podium where Vrethka had threatened the world 2 weeks earlier. "The Vrolketh have conquered over 200 worlds," she began, "and on every one of those worlds, life evolved along what we now understand to be the galactic norm, clear predator-prey hierarchies, where each species knows its place, where small things flee from big things, where the correct survival response to overwhelming threat is retreat. These are sensible worlds, logical worlds, worlds where evolution followed clean, predictable paths. She paused and looked out at the assembly. Earth is not a sensible world. She brought up a chart showing Earth's predator density compared to the galactic average. Earth had 17 times more apex and mesopredators per biome than the average habitable planet. On most worlds, there is one dominant predator per ecosystem, and everything else has learned to avoid it. She said, "On Earth, we have ecosystems where wolves and bears and mountain lions and eagles all occupy the same territory and compete with each other constantly. Our planet did not produce a predator hierarchy. It produced a predator arms race, and that arms race did something to every single species on this planet, including the ones we think of as harmless." She showed footage, not of cats this time, but of other Earth creatures. A honey badger attacking a pride of lions and winning through sheer refusal to stop fighting. A mother moose charging a grizzly bear twice her size to protect her calf. A cassowary disemboweling a man with a single kick from its dinosaur feet. A hippopotamus biting a crocodile in half. A swan chasing a full-grown man out of a park while his friends filmed and laughed. On Earth, Elena said, even the herbivores are dangerous. Even the small things fight back. Even the prey animals have decided that the best response to being hunted is not to run, but to be so aggressive and so stubborn and so unreasonably violent that predators learn to hunt something else instead. She let that sink in. The Vralketh's Skorax was engineered to dominate species from normal worlds, species that evolved a flight response to overwhelming threat. But Earth is a death world. Our species evolved alongside so many predators and so many threats that the flight response alone was not enough to survive. We evolved something else. We evolved the ability to stand our ground, to fight back against things larger than ourselves, to look at something terrifying and choose anger over fear. She brought up one final image, a photograph taken 30,000 years ago and preserved in the caves of Lascaux. A painting of humans hunting a mammoth, tiny stick figures surrounding a creature 100 times their size, armed with nothing but pointed sticks and the insane conviction that they could win. And then, she said, we did something that no species on any of those 200 conquered worlds ever did. We took the predators that shared our death world, and instead of fleeing from them, we walked up to them and said, "You are mine now." She showed the timeline. Wolves domesticated 15,000 years ago and turned into dogs. Wildcats domesticated 10,000 years ago and turned into the creatures that had just humiliated the most feared biological weapon in the galaxy. Horses tamed and ridden into battle, hawks and falcons trained to hunt, even elephants and cheetahs pressed into human service at various points in history. We are the species that looked at apex predators and saw not threats, but tools and companions and friends. The Vralketh think the Skorax is the most dangerous predator in this scenario, but they are wrong. They sent their monster to a planet full of monsters, and the biggest monster of all is the one that figured out how to make all the other monsters work for it. The assembly was silent for a long moment, and then it was not silent at all. The effect was immediate and electric. Humanity did not just resist the Vralketh, it leaned into the resistance with the kind of creative, unhinged energy that only a species raised on a death world could produce. Engineers developed sonic disruptors based on Elena's analysis of the Skorax's dominance frequencies. Weapons that broadcast counter-signals that jammed the creature's ability to project fear. Soldiers equipped with these devices found they could stand their ground against the Skorax without feeling the overwhelming urge to flee. And once a human being could face the creature without terror, it turned out that human beings were very, very good at fighting things. The Vralketh panicked and deployed 3 more Skorax. It did not help. Sergeant Duval led a mechanized squad into direct engagement with a Skorax outside Lyon, with Colonel Whiskers riding on top of the lead armored vehicle like a furry orange hood ornament. The cat had been fitted with a tiny tactical vest that he clearly despised, and he yowled the entire way into battle, which Duval said was actually helpful for morale, because it was impossible to be afraid when you were laughing. The combined arms approach of sonic disruptors and conventional weapons and strategically placed very angry cats proved devastatingly effective. 2 of the 3 new Skorax were neutralized within a week. The third was driven into the Atlantic Ocean, where it encountered a pod of orcas. The orcas killed it in 20 minutes, because of course they did, because even Earth's ocean was a death world, and orcas were perhaps the most Earth animal of all. Intelligent social apex predators that killed great white sharks for fun. Up on the Vralketh command ship, Vreth-Ka watched all of this unfold with growing curiosity. Horror. He had reviewed Earth's biological database, something he should have done before the invasion, but had not, because no previous world had required research. Predators were predators, and prey was prey, and the Skorax handled everything in between. But Earth's biological database was a nightmare. A planet where the trees poisoned each other, where fungi controlled the minds of insects, where a small creature called a shrimp could punch with the force of a bullet, where the dominant species had hunted every apex predator on the planet to near extinction, not out of necessity, but for entertainment. He stared at a photograph that one of his analysts had flagged. A human child, no more than 5 years old, sitting on a couch with a house cat in her lap. The same species of creature that had broken his Skorax. The child was smiling, and the cat was purring, and they looked perfectly content in each other's company. The child had tamed a predator from a death world, and she did not even know that was remarkable. Vreth-Ka understood then with a cold clarity that spread through his body like ice. The Skorax was never the apex predator in this scenario. It never had been. The humans were, and they kept Earth's predators as pets. The request for a second diplomatic meeting came 17 days after the first Skorax had been deployed, and 11 days before the Vralketh's original deadline was set to expire. It did not come with threats this time. Ambassador Vreth-Ka transmitted a single message on an open channel that every human on Earth could hear, and it said simply, "We wish to speak." The meeting was held in the same chamber in Geneva where Vreth-Ka had first announced the Vralketh's claim on Earth, and this time, when the alien ambassador walked through the doors, he did not walk like a conqueror surveying his future property. He walked like someone entering a room full of things he did not fully understand, and was no longer certain he could survive. The human delegation was led by the Secretary General, and flanked by military advisors and diplomats from every major nation. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat at the table in an official capacity as the head of the newly created Terran Xenobiology division, and next to her sat Sergeant Mark Duval in his dress uniform with his medals pinned to his chest and a look on his face that said he had punched a clock on fear 2 weeks ago and was now operating entirely on coffee and stubbornness. And on the table between the two delegations sat Colonel Whiskers. He had been groomed for the occasion, which he had not enjoyed, and he wore a small collar with a medal pinned to it, the Légion d'honneur, which the French government had awarded him in a ceremony that had drawn more viewers than any event in French history. He sat on the polished diplomatic table, with his single eye fixed on Vreth-Ka, and his torn ear tilted forward, and his tail curling slowly back and forth. Vreth-Ka looked at the cat. The cat looked at Vreth-Ka. Vreth-Ka looked away first. The negotiation began, and it was immediately clear that the power in the room had shifted entirely. Vreth-Ka no longer spoke of incorporation, or surrender, or the inevitable triumph of the Dominion. He spoke carefully and quietly, and he kept glancing at Colonel Whiskers, as if expecting the cat to do something unpredictable. which was fair, because that was essentially what cats did at all times. The Dominion acknowledges, Vrethka said through his translator, that the pacification of Earth has not proceeded as anticipated. Duval made a sound that might have been a cough and might have been a laugh. We are prepared to withdraw our forces and recognize Earth as a sovereign world within the galactic community, Vrethka continued, in exchange for a mutual non-aggression agreement and the cessation of hostilities. The Secretary General looked at Elena. Elena looked at her notes, and then she looked at Vrethka with the calm, focused expression of a woman who had spent 2 weeks studying the Vralketh's psychology as carefully as she had studied the Skorax's. That is a start, she said. Enough. Vrethka's mandibles clicked in surprise. Earth requires 3 things, Elena said. First, a formal non-aggression treaty with the Vralketh Dominion, including a prohibition on the deployment of Skorax or similar bioweapons against any world. Second, full reparations for the damage caused by the Skorax deployment, including the lives lost during the initial engagement. And third, unrestricted access to the Galactic Communications Network, so that Earth can make contact with every species the Dominion has conquered. The third demand hit Vrethka like a physical blow, and everyone in the room saw it. His spines flattened against his skull, and his compound eyes went wide, because he understood immediately what that meant. If humans gained access to the Galactic Network, they would not just talk to other species. They would tell them what had happened here. They would tell 200 conquered worlds that the Skorax could be beaten by creatures small enough to fit in a shoebox. That, Vrethka said slowly, is not a reasonable request. Duval reached over and gently placed Colonel Whiskers 1 inch closer to the Vralketh delegation. The cat stared at Vrethka with his single golden eye, and the tip of his tail twitched once. Vrethka signed the treaty. He signed all 3 provisions, and he did it quickly. And when he was finished, he stood and looked at the human delegation. And for just a moment the cold diplomatic mask slipped, and what was underneath was not anger or humiliation, but genuine bewilderment. We have traveled the galaxy for 6,000 years, he said. We have encountered 412 sentient species, and we have studied the biology of 10,000 worlds. And in all of that time, we have never found anything like this planet. Your world is chaos. Your ecosystems are warfare. Your most beloved companions are small predators that tolerate your existence only when it suits them. Your species makes sense. Elena smiled. We know, she said. That is sort of the point. Vrethka turned and walked out of the chamber, and he did not look back. The Vralketh fleet withdrew from Earth's solar system 14 hours later, and the world celebrated in the way that only humans can, which is to say, loudly, and with a great deal of property damage and an enormous number of cat-themed parties. But the real impact came in the weeks and months that followed. Earth gained access to the Galactic Communications Network, and Elena's team began broadcasting. They sent messages to every conquered world in the Dominion's territory. They sent the footage of Colonel Whiskers facing down the Skorax. They sent Elena's analysis of the creature's psychological weaknesses. They sent detailed instructions on how to resist. And the galaxy listened. On a world called Verith Prime, where a species of gentle 6-armed beings had lived under Vralketh rule for 300 years, the footage played on every screen in every city, and for the first time in living memory, the people of Verath did not look at their Skorax overseers with fear. On a water world called Tessic, where an aquatic civilization had been confined to a single ocean by Vralketh territorial predators, a scientist watched Elena's UN presentation and began developing countermeasures based on Earth's sonic disruptor technology. On world after world after world, species that had been broken by the Skorax saw that a creature weighing less than 5 kilograms had done what their entire civilizations could not. And something shifted inside them. Not a strategy or a technology, but something deeper. Something that looked a lot like the realization that fear is not a fact, but a choice. Rebellions began. Small at first, quiet, but growing. The Vralketh Dominion, which had stood unchallenged for 6,000 years, began to crack, and the cracks all traced back to a single planet orbiting a single unremarkable star, where the inhabitants were too stubborn and too creative, and too fundamentally insane to do what they were told. 6 months after the Vralketh withdrawal, a delegation arrived at Earth, not from the Dominion, but from the Free Systems Alliance, a coalition of 12 recently liberated worlds that had banded together in the wake of Earth's example. They came not with warships, but with gifts and questions, and a deep, sincere desire to understand the species that had changed everything. The lead envoy was a tall, willowy being from Verath Prime, with 6 arms and large dark eyes that blinked in astonishment as she was escorted through the halls of the newly established Terran Xenobiology Institute. "We have studied your transmissions extensively," the envoy said to Elena, who walked beside her with Colonel Whiskers, cradled in her arms, because the cat refused to be left behind, and Elena had learned long ago that arguing with a cat was a battle no species could win, and we have one question that we cannot answer from the data alone. "Ask it," Elena said. "What else lives on your world?" Elena laughed, a bright, warm sound that echoed through the corridor, and she led the envoy into a large presentation hall where her team had prepared what they were calling the Earth Biology Introduction Series, a comprehensive overview of life on the planet that humans called home. She set Colonel Whiskers down on the podium, where he immediately sat on her notes and began washing his face, and she pulled up the first slide. It was a photograph of a honey badger standing over a dead cobra, with blood on its face and murder in its eyes. "Let me tell you about a creature called the honey badger," Elena said. "It weighs about 12 kilograms. It has been documented fighting off lions. It is immune to most venoms, and it has been observed attacking vehicles." The envoy's 6 hands gripped the edges of her seat. "That is your most dangerous species?" the envoy asked. "That is not even close to our most dangerous species," Elena said cheerfully. "Would you like to hear about the orca, which is a predator that kills great white sharks for sport and teaches its children to do the same? Or the human-designed organism known as the domestic dog, which we created by selectively breeding wolves until they loved us?" The envoy looked at Colonel Whiskers, who had finished washing his face, and was now staring at her with the calm, evaluating gaze of a small predator, deciding whether something was food or furniture. "Your world is terrifying," the envoy whispered. "Our world is home," Elena said, and there was a warmth in her voice that had nothing to do with dominance or predation or the galactic balance of power, and everything to do with the simple, fierce love that humans have for the loud, messy, violent, beautiful planet that made them what they are. Window. The sun was setting over the Institute's grounds, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, and a bird sang, and the wind moved through the trees of a world that had been fighting with itself for 4 billion years, and had produced in that endless war something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that befriended its monsters. And on the podium, Colonel Whiskers, one-eyed and scarred, and decorated with the highest military honor France had to offer, yawned enormously, and curled into a ball on top of Dr. Vasquez's notes, and fell asleep in a patch of sunlight. His metal glinted as he breathed. His torn ear twitched once at some dream only he could see. And the stars outside were full of worlds that were only just beginning to learn what one small angry cat on one small angry planet had always known. That the most dangerous creatures in the universe are not the biggest or the strongest or the most perfectly engineered. They are the ones that simply refuse to be afraid.